are now starting another discussion of the second day of the Prague European Summit. Now we will focus on visions, on future, because we can welcome here participants of this year's Future European Leaders Forum. This forum is dedicated to young people who want to shape the Europe, who have ideas how to do specific policies, who are already in their young age focusing on specific areas and trying to implement their ideas. And we have the PES-FELF, the Future European Leaders Forum here to help them to create their ideas, to push them through and to make them really happen. This year's the participants were creating policy posters, some recommendations on specific agendas, and during this panel discussion we will have the opportunity to listen to them, to know their views, to know their ideas. And also in the coffee break area, maybe you already noticed that there are posters already presented, so there after this discussion you can go and read a bit more about their ideas, about the measures, about the recommendations from the young participants of this forum, and you can also discuss with them more. You can also tell them your opinions, even if they are negative, for example, because as all we know, negative feedback is what is pushing us to be better and to improve. So yeah, I'm very happy that the Future European Leaders Forum is taking place this year, as it was years before as well. I'm also one of the alumni of PES-FELF. Unfortunately, I joined PES-FELF in the coronavirus year, so it was online. But I had the opportunity to meet inspiring people, to make new contacts, and to create this type of policy paper. And yeah, 2 years ago we were presenting these policy papers to Mr. Tomáš Petříček, who is also joining this discussion, because that year in 2020, I think it was, he was the Minister of Foreign Affairs. So you can see that the PES-FELF, the discussions, the networking of the young people can really have impact when it is organized under the Prague European Summit. So that's for the beginning. I would like to now pass the floor to Eva Horelová, who is the Deputy Head of the Representation of the European Commission in the Czech Republic, who will moderate this discussion about the visions and future of Europe with young leaders. Thank you.
Good afternoon to everybody. Very happy to see you here actively, but also online in the virtual space. Indeed, also as a representative of the European Commission in the Czech Republic, I'm very happy that the young leaders concentrated on the most topical issues in the European Union agenda. So also the policy priorities of the current European Commission under the leadership of Ursula von der Leyen, but also then in cooperation with the European parliamentarians and the member states working on the legislation and all these responses to the questions of today are in line with what you did focus over these 2 days of discussions and workshops. So without further delays, please let me give the floor to Žaneta Greta Papp, who will be speaking about energy security. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the floor. So as you heard, I'm Jeanette, and I'm a Hungarian FELF participant based in Prague, actually. I will speak on behalf of the energy team, and I'm presenting our policy proposal on how to secure the global supply chain for the green transition. Why is it needed? That's the main question maybe that can pop up in your heads. The EU is pursuing a green transition through the lens of the European Green Deal. The future of a greener and more digital EU is based on new technologies and thus dependent on raw materials. Cobalt is a critical mineral. It's a key ingredient for batteries, without which the future of zero-emission transportation seems a mission impossible. Therefore, we believe that the EU-Cuba strategic partnership on raw materials is the key solution for our green energy diversification. We propose 4 steps. First of all, to seek a special cobalt-focused cooperation with Cuba. Second of all, to establish a critical mineral trade partnership. Thirdly, to involve Cuba in the already existing European platforms on raw materials. And last but not least, is to harmonize the EU legislation, because the current supply of recycled cobalt is not covering the current demand. The EU is largely dependent on the current cobalt supply chain dominated by the PRC with more than 70%. Although China is by far the largest refiner of cobalt, the next largest is Finland with 7% of the global supply. Due to geographical reasons, 72% of cobalt is sourced in Democratic Republic of Congo. The trade partnership between PRC and Congo almost entirely dominates the whole supply. The main problem is already existing. By 2030, the global demand for cobalt will rise significantly, causing even more severe shortages due to undersupply. Cuba holds the 3rd largest global reserves. Thanks to the country's current low exports and high reserves, Cuba could provide a reliable, diversified source for the EU's green transition, which could be actually further improved with secondary cobalt usage. In fact, by 2050, 67% of cobalt-based batteries in the EU could come from recycled sources. It means that it's time for the EU to not only react on the geopolitical turbulences, but also act proactively. The currently launched Critical Mineral Act has already stated this willingness to cooperate with 3rd countries. The EU already has a pilot strategic partnership with Canada and also with Ukraine. These initiatives are necessary to strengthen the supply chain in the EU itself. Taking into account all these elements that I have stated, the European green energy security, and in particularly the strategic autonomy, is therefore based on green transformation and reliable supply chains. With a holistic approach, the cobalt market can be further improved. Cooperation with Cuba is essential to ensure a resilient cobalt supply chain for zero-emission mobility in the EU and therefore globally. As I pointed out before, under the Action Plan on Critical Raw Materials, Cuba has the potential to become the next strategic partner of the European Union on raw materials, especially in cobalt extraction and refining. I stated before that too, that due to the cobalt industry, the EU could reach its targets by 2050. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeanette. That was well on time, as the European parliamentarian would do it in the assigned 5 minutes. I will give the floor to Antonia Laura Papp, who will be speaking about economic resilience. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. My name is Antonia Pup, and I am a history student from Romania. I am honored to be here to be part of PES-FELF program and to proudly represent the economic resilience team. Our job was not easy, as you can imagine. So I first want to thank my team, Natalie, Peter, and Marwan, for their contribution and active support. Why I say our job was not easy? It is because resilience has rather become a buzzword everyone uses, even if it makes sense or not, than a horizontal issue, just because it is in fashion. How our team defines economic resilience, it is about being aware of our vulnerabilities, and overdependency is one vulnerability, while maintaining ourselves competitive. I don't think we should be caught in the trap of exclusive options between resilience and competitivity. So what we propose is a 3-step plan to overcome overdependencies, lead in tech, and protect our critical infrastructure. First and foremost, I am going to talk about the fact that because EU lacks competitivity in high-tech industries with only 10% of global share of microchips market based in European Union, we need to invest more smartly, swiftly in upskilling and reskilling the human capital as our first key point. We advocate for putting together our resources, all members in the European Union, to create the first pan-European training center for microelectronics excellence. Provide more short-term workplace swaps for knowledge-powered industries, and expand the digital nomad visa in the whole European Union so as to make the European Union a more friendly community to all the digital natives that can shape the digital transition and can help us lead in tech. Second of all, our second proposal addresses the following issue. The investment model in the European Union has showed its limits. It is way too prudential, way too conservative, with 2/3 of the investment money out there being only from the banks and from public entities. So what we argue is really have a more courageous model on the investments issues. EU should have a clear strategy on how to attract more high-risk investment, bring more hedge funds in the European Union, and attract business angels. But more than a strategy and more than another action plan and a committee on that, we need to take a step further and relax tax policy and have less administrative burdens as our way to go. Last but not least, we cannot leave this room talking about economic resilience without pointing out the fact that we need to be resilient on how we approach our critical infrastructures, networks in particular. I am very proud to say that I come from a country that has banned firms, just like Czech Republic, connected to authoritarian regimes from 5G bidding. But unfortunately, this is not the case for the whole European states. We need a common and integrated approach on how to restrict firms that are connected to authoritarian regimes from taking over our critical infrastructures, from controlling our networks, and of course, keep them away if they present a risk from accessing EU's Innovations Fund. Here we are right now, arguing on how we became dependent on Putin's gas, and I highly would recommend that we will not be sitting in the same room 5 years from now arguing that we became dependent on another authoritarian regime to a more critical and I would say more sensitive topic, which is technological resilience. We cannot afford not to learn from today's lesson, and we need to take action now. Again, reshuffling from the old investment model to a more brave one, investing wisely and swiftly in the reskilling and upskilling of the human capital while protecting our critical infrastructure and letting our common values guide us in this process, we think it is the way to go. 3 concrete steps for a resilient economy of today that will translate in more security and more prosperity tomorrow. I wait for your questions, but first I wait for you to join us in the quest for a more resilient economy of the European Union. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Antonia. That was an excellent overview, and I can totally see you sitting in the office of the Vice President Dombrovskis, responsible for resilient economy, and briefing him and giving him all these advice, and also calling upon the people here and online for action. Thank you for that. The next speaker is Zuzana Hellerová, and it's another big topic of the twin transitions.
Thank you very much for giving me the word. I'm Susanna. I come from the Czech Republic, and I'm very happy to be sitting here representing our working group on climate and digital transition, with our hearts leading us mostly in the direction of climate transition rather than digital. To start off, I would like to ask everybody to think of their breakfast. Then, also think of the toothpaste you used to brush your teeth this morning. I am wondering, do you know what is the carbon footprint of the food you ate and the toothpaste you used? Probably not. How could you, since this information is often not known to the producers themselves, and if so, then it is mostly hidden from consumers somewhere in large-scale industry reports. The transition towards a carbon-neutral economy is essential to tackle climate change effectively. Fast-moving consumer goods, such as the toothpaste mentioned earlier, or the food you had on your breakfast plate, play a crucial role in such a transition. The production of fast-moving consumer goods is one of the greatest contributors to climate change, with the latest scientific evidence showing that solely our food systems generate about 35% of total man-made greenhouse gas emissions globally. Unfortunately, at this moment, the European regulatory landscape is not well designed to help consumers to make well-informed choices with regard to their consumption. The information on products' carbon footprint is rarely available to them, and also, there is a broad range of eco-labels coexisting in various EU countries, which makes the navigation of the European single market difficult. Therefore, our group proposes a new standardized EU-wide compulsory label, communicating the total amount of CO2 emissions associated with fast-moving consumer goods throughout their life cycle. We propose a label that will look like a thermometer. This thermometer will be color-coded in green, amber, and red, based on the product's performance, and the label will also show the total number of kilograms of CO2 emitted in the product's life cycle. This color-coded thermometer would be placed on the front of the packaging of all fast-moving consumer goods. So, our proposal will do mainly three things. Firstly, it will address the lack of reliable information on carbon footprint of fast-moving consumer goods. Secondly, it will inspire more sustainable and well-informed consumer choices. And thirdly, it will tackle greenwashing. It also fits well with the current EU policy landscape. For example, our proposal builds on the recent directive on empowering consumers for the green transition. And when it comes to food specifically, our proposal connects well to the fact that the European Commission is expected to come out with a proposal for the revision of the regulation on the provision of food information to consumers in the second quarter of 2023. And we very much hope that compulsory carbon footprint labeling will play a significant part in this proposal. Our suggestion does not only have the potential to help the consumers to navigate the market more easily, but also to motivate companies to review their production processes and make them greener. We can see our proposal being implemented, for example, in a combination with subsidies for better ranking products, which would then further incentivize a green transition as well as enable more affordable prices of climate-friendly products. We truly believe that a harmonized EU-wide carbon footprint label will allow Europeans to make more climate-friendly choices. Francis Bacon once said, "Knowledge itself is power." Providing consumers with information on carbon footprint of products make them feel empowered. And speaking on behalf of the youth, we want to feel empowered. Empowered to make choices about what we buy and therefore make our contribution to tackling climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zuzana, for these indeed empowering messages with that many suggestions. That very much appreciated. And maybe we need to find ways how to bring them also over to Egypt, to the negotiators of the COP27s. I think they would be inspired as well. Many thanks to the future European leaders. We have here also once a young leader, always a young leader, Tomáš Petříček, who has been for many years since young age political active in the community, in the civil society, who has been, I think, the youngest Czech Foreign Affairs Minister, if I'm not mistaken. If not the youngest, then among the youngest. So Tomáši, how do you see all the suggestions, and do you have maybe some suggestions on your side, how the youth should be more active, and how can they practically bring about these suggestions to practice?
Thank you, Eva. Good afternoon, everybody. Frankly, it is a eye blink that you turn from a prospective young leader to somebody who is coming for such an event only to maybe give some advices or experiences as an old leader. But first of all, I would like to really appreciate the presentations, the ideas you presented just now. It is great to have so much energy and clarity in what you are presenting, because I think clarity is what decision makers, policy makers expect. May I very briefly raise a couple of remarks, maybe to help you to improve your thinking in future? I think all three presentations, all three proposals are great. I like them a lot. What I a little bit missed in all three of them is explaining how you dealt with potential risks and weaknesses, because all proposals are not only great ideas. You have to always evaluate that there are some risks, there might be some particular concerns, for example, of industry, of society. But I think this is also great if you can explain to the audience how did you dealt with risk assessment or evaluation. In case, for example, of labeling, what kind of barriers it can create for small companies, for example, because it will bring some additional cost for them. In case of Cuba and cobalt, how did you evaluate it? How did you evaluate the political risks? Because Cuba is an authoritarian country again, whether EU should rely on another authoritarian regime, for example, with a risk of being affected by, for example, US extraterritorial sanctions in the future if something happened. And in case of economic resilience, how to, for example, avoid the risks that we will face a competition of big tech from the United States. I missed a little bit of this. You highlighted the technological competition with, for example, Chinese companies, but the fact that, for example, there are entry barriers to the market with innovative products, because some niches are free, but the market is largely dominated by well-established big tech companies, for example. So it would be great if you always focus on addressing explicitly the risks your proposals might face from different angles, because then you make the policymakers aware that there are some risks. This is not only UPO, and that you have considered this risk when designing a proposal. So I think this is one part. Second, you should also try maybe to narrow down. I think it was especially in the case of economic resilience that you try to tackle a lot of relevant issues at the same time. I think that sometimes the focusing on one particular issue and coming more to the details of it can be more useful than trying to navigate decision makers throughout many different areas. He's lost then sometimes. So try to keep the focus. And last but not least, I need to close down by just applauding on the way you presented all ideas here, because it was great, and I think that it's nice to see that the younger generation is much better than us in presentation. We were never taught that.
I'd like to give the presenters 3 minutes to react give the feedback on what the points Tomáš raised, and maybe I will start with Antonia, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Minister. I think you raised the football ball to my match, and because I actually wanted to make a point about this. Another very big risk we have connected to big tech might not be seen right now is the fact that European Union, I think it is a very good nursery for unicorns just to see them go to United States and to Asia. So I think this is a very important risk we have to first acknowledge and then counter. And this leads me to the fact that we need to still play by the rules and make sure that we are creative and not trapped again in the trap of exclusive options. I think that having a good way of improving our investment model and our tax policies could possibly make us more competitive when it comes to our relationship with the United States. And hearing what you said, I was thinking about another political risk, and I think it is related to 5G, because also we are in a great power competition right now, let's face it. I think what we lack right now, dealing with economic resilience, with energy security, and also with the digital and green transition, they are all very technical issues. The regular citizen, I feel, does not really get to them. And because they are very technical issues and they tend to be seen as rather only Brussels problems, I think we should put more emphasis on giving a political face to the digital and green transition and to the recovery and resilience of our economies. And this can be done only by political accountability. And I cannot finish this remark by returning to the saying of Václav Havel that was proposing, I think, the best policy proposal for the European Union. And I think it is very relevant today in the context of drawing the line after the conference on the future of Europe. I think we need a constitutional approach to European Union, a 10-point manifest that will lead to the digital and green transition, that will very much say what are our values, and that our values will also help us to choose our partners when it comes to more specific issues such as 5G. Thank you so much for this, and I would really hope that we will make these proposals into practice. But again, returning to the fundamentals, returning to Václav Havel is very important for me, I think, because it is also about the citizen, the regular citizen that is expanding the bubble.
Thank you so much for the question, and I'm highly appreciated to be here because actually Mr. Petříček is my professor at geopolitical studies as well, so it's great to see you in another kind of, let's say, role. Well, actually that was a very great question, and I think the most problematic part when it comes to Cuba and the EU partnership, mainly in a strategic position, is the US. That's definitely sure. We were trying to tackling the problems, and when it comes to the US, it's problematic because of military, because of economy, and because of political reasons. From a military perspective, we are actually in a collective defense system with the US that's undoubtedly, and we cannot criticize that. On the other hand, from an economic point of view, the LNG exports and the whole economic system is kind of relying on the US steps and principles. And of course, the institutions that we have are also relying on the American interests in economics. The third point is the political aspect. The Western values are critical for us. So we were thinking about how can we actually defend the values, the Western values in mining as well. So basically, when it comes to the US, we should tackle these fields all in all. But on the other hand, even though the US is our strategic and prior trade partner, we should think about another thing, another reason that is nowadays pretty relevant, is the strategical autonomy. The strategic autonomy is the #1 priority next to the Green Deal in the European Union. And when it comes to the EU, we should not neglect the fact that the EU is not just a geopolitical power, but a geo-economical power as well, which means that we have our field to leverage in economic terms. So even though we would like to keep the closest ally to us as much as we can, we would like to diversify our economic partners, let's say, and our strategic principles. On the other hand, what actually I wanted to raise in my presentation as well, the #1 priority when it comes to Cuba is to implement these mining kind of trade-offs in euro. The currency, the fixed currency, is pretty important in this case, so we can actually somehow can rid of the, let's say, American influence a bit, but not really piss the US on the other hand. So what I wanted to, and I'm getting back to serious points, but like what I wanted to really point it out is that we have our chance to leverage. And the diversification is not about getting out of the let's say, transatlantic transatlantic community, but it's more about to being aware of that it's not just something that we should keep, but what we need to a bit diversify. And there are a lot of new players. Cuba actually, in the EU just a few days ago, not in the EU, but in the UN, actually the states except Israel rejected the boycott in Cuba that was actually imposed by the US. So that was a first step, and I'm willing to see how many steps are just in front of us that we can take. So I think like the partnership with Cuba is just an open door, and the EU can just walk through it, either with the US, because that's also strategic importance to the US to keep us in the alliance. So basically, that's just a matter of time, and this is the reason why we are willing to cooperate with Cuba, and I think that's beneficial for all of us in the world. Thank you so much.
Oh yeah, sorry, I ended up with 2 mics.
Be generous.
Yeah, I will share.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. We very much appreciate it, because of course we're just at the beginning of everything, and we're not experts on all policy files, so we're very happy for any sort of feedback. What comes to mind when it comes to carbon footprint labeling is that it's a heavily contested topic, right? When I look back, well, I wasn't aware of it at that time, but when I was studying, for example, what happened with the food information law, the most important law on the provision of information to consumers on foodstuffs in the European Union, which was negotiated back in, I think it was 2010 and 2011, was that when it came out of the Commission, it was pretty much more on the public health side. But then it was so heavily lobbied when it went through the ordinary legislative procedure in the Council and the European Parliament, is that it changed very much, and there were things that were not implemented. For example, the compulsory color labeling traffic lights And I'm a little bit worried that, for example, something similar could happen now when we're going into 2023 and the new proposal coming out soon. That maybe once the Commission comes out with the dossier, compulsory carbon footprint labeling might be there. But we have to be aware that in 2011 it was the heaviest lobbied file ever up to that point. I think now we have other files that have been lobbied more heavily. But just to be aware and just to be prepared for it and have discussions with the industry and end up with a compulsory carbon footprint labeling. The second thing that we were thinking about was that there are a lot of issues when it comes to how to actually calculate carbon footprint, especially when we look at it from the perspective of a product's life cycle. I always, and my group knows that, I always use the example of Oatly. That's a brand of vegan milk, if maybe some of you know it. And they are using already carbon footprint labeling. And what they basically do is that they adapt it as they go. So for example, when there's a new, they just adapt it based on the latest scientific evidence. So we just need to go hand in hand with the science and just implement it as we see the advances. And the third thing that comes to my mind, and what Mr. Petříček already mentioned, and that's that it could bring forward some prices for small companies. And there wasn't, I'm not an expert in when it comes to economics and finance, so we were working in multidisciplinary teams, so that was something that somebody else was mostly working on. But as I mentioned, we were thinking about, incentivizing companies to actually implement the labels, so providing them with subsidies for basically for better ranking products, and sort of working with them as much as possible and just making it easier for the small companies, for example.
Thank you. Thank you very much to you as rapporteurs, but also to your teams, the multidisciplinary teams with whom you had been working. I'd like to invite you in the audience to please pay attention again to the posters displayed downstairs in the coffee break area, and please enjoy and make advantage of the rapporteurs and the other colleagues who have been working on them to continue the discussion. The group has been called Future European Leaders. But ladies, you and your colleagues, you are all the leaders, but I hope you are future decision makers and experts. And all the best, good luck with that. Thank you.